One of the things for the people that are interested in the military that I asked to look into, the F-35, we're doing an upgrade, a simple upgrade, but we're also doing an F-55. I'm going to call it an F-55, and that's going to be a substantial upgrade, but it's going to be also with two engines because the F-35 has a single engine. I don't like single engines. No matter how good, they tell me, Larry, the engine will never go out. Well, I think it goes out on occasion, very rarely. I think the most beautiful fighter jet in the world is the F-22, but we're going to do an F-22 Super, and it'll be a very modern version of the F-22 fighter jet. And I don't know if you know it, but you know who copied it? China. They copied it. I said, I'm looking. They said, that's the F-22. They copied our design.
I need a cup of tea. So, I wasn't going to discuss this, but then I saw the usual charlatans that started waxing lyrical about the F-55, so I guess I need to cover this. I mean, there is more interesting stuff about what happened between India and Pakistan that has a real strategic relevance, but we are here of speaking about the Super F-22 and the F-55. So let's get the Super F-22 out of the way. There is already a program ongoing to update the F-22. It is an important program. We have already discussed it on this channel, and it is going to really increase the lethality of the F-22 as a combat aircraft. Now we know that the F-37 is going ahead. I'm pretty sure that in a few years it will produce the first prototype of an aircraft that is going to be very advanced, is going to be very effective, it will have great performance, and so on. So there is literally no need of a Super F-22. The Congress actually commissioned a study of how much would have costed to restart the production of the F-22, and it was an enormous number. It would have ended up with an acquisition cost even higher than that of the F-47. So it was clearly not the case, but even if it was affordable enough to restart this production, you would be restarting the production of an aircraft that has been designed in the 80s, in the late 80s, early 90s. Structural technology has improved, aerodynamic simulation has improved, propulsion has improved, systems have improved, and once you aim at incorporating some of these improvements in the aircraft, and that will be a lot because all these areas, the main areas have really improved, it will be an entirely new aircraft. And you're basically already building one. So the super duper F-22 makes zero sense. But I think that is even more interesting the mention of the F-55. This should be a radical improvement of the F-35, and the distinctive improvement would be two engines rather than one. Yeah. So, where to start? If you decide to put two engines on the F-35, you obviously need a redesign of the aircraft. And actually, passing from one engine to two engines is a pretty radical redesign. We have some examples of this happening. For example, one comes from my own native country, Italy. The G91 light attack aircraft, the latest version was the G95Y with two engines, but those are the 50s, the 60s, and that was a relatively simple aircraft. That was an aircraft that could have been redesigned by a small team in a couple of years. The F-35 took forever to develop. You could argue that the development is not ended yet because the Block 4, which is a big improvement that is going to happen, it's having its problems, but it's going to happen, it will be the one that will bring the F-35 to the original standard performance that was in the Air Force specifications when the contract was issued. So, but let's suppose that we want to redesign the F-35 with two engines. So the first thing that you need to do is obviously redesign the structure, because the entire tail will be different. But if you consider the overall aerodynamic configuration of that aircraft, you see that the wings need to be redesigned. And that would need to be redesigned anyway, because the weight distribution of the aircraft will change. So the design of the wing and the tail surfaces need to be adapted to the new weight distribution to make the aircraft just the right degree of instability that is necessary to assure maneuverability. But when you start redesigning the fuselage, all your internal system, hydraulics, electrics, cabling, anything like that, needs to be redesigned. And these systems need to be designed. Is not that if you just change the length of the piping or the length of the cabling, you are guaranteed that everything will still work. You will need to do the job basically from the beginning as well. And you're not guaranteed that what you have designed for the original aircraft will be perfectly functional in the new aircraft, which will be obviously heavier. And the forces, for example, the aerodynamic forces on the control surfaces will be different. Moreover, the F-35 is a very dense aircraft. All the internal room is occupied by something. There's a lot of fuel. In fact, I believe that the F-35 has a range, a combat range that is quite higher than is normally acknowledged. But this is a different subject. So there's fuel, there are black boxes, there are power generators, there is the life support system for the pilot, there's all the electronics, all the sensors. All this stuff is quite tightly packed in the F-35. If you start changing the aircraft structure, you need to relocate all these systems, and all the connections with these systems will change, and you will have to verify that everything will still be working, which is not a given. On a civilian aircraft, it's relatively easy to add sections of the fuselage to make a longer variant. As long as you are careful with the weight distribution, it sort of works. There are no real conceptual problems. But for an aircraft like the F-35, it's a nightmare. You understand that such a radical upgrade will amount as a new aircraft. The United States already has experience of a similar situation. The F-18 Super Hornet is a derivative of the F-18. That is, it is an aircraft that shares the same general configuration. It shares a limited amount of parts, but otherwise it is an entirely different aircraft. So the F-55 would have been a derivative of the F-35, would not be an upgrade of the F-35. So the question becomes, why on earth you would want one? Well, in the press conference, what was said is that two engines are better than one. Always. Which is obviously not the case. This was true till the 70s, the 80s, when the reliability of jet engines was not great. It may still have some usefulness today, for example, in surviving a bird strike. But anyway, it is not the deciding factor in terms of aircraft safety. However, if you have two engines rather than one, in the present day you have a relatively important advantage. That is, your power, electrical power production increases, and it could increase quite a lot, and in theory just double. This could be an important advantage in an age where the electronic component of the aircraft is always increasing, where computer systems, radars, and basically anything else is really power hungry. And in fact, power generation is one of the limiting factor to the upgradability of an aircraft. And mind, don't think that miniaturization will supersede all these problems with the progress of technology. It is true that some digital components will become smaller, better, less power hungry, but other components like radars benefit for additional power, and even if the radar becomes more efficient, you may always want to push it to the max because it gives you advantages in terms of range and other capabilities. So an F-55 would make sense if there was the clear understanding that the electrical power available on the F-35 is a serious limitation to the capabilities of the aircraft, which at this stage doesn't seem to be so critical. Recently, after the F-47 announcement, there has been a proposal, autonomous proposal from Lockheed Martin to spice up the F-35. They described it as a Ferrari upgrade of the aircraft, and I really approve of the name. The idea is to apply to the F-35 the technologies, or at least part of the technologies, that have been developed for the F-47. Well, there have been already talks for a few years about replacing the F-35 engine with an adaptive cycle engine, which will be the kind of engine that will be installed on the F-47, and we don't know exactly which kind of technologies Lockheed Martin was referring to, but that would seem more feasible than a radical redesign of the aircraft. And you always have to ask yourself which kind of role this new F-55 would have in a potentially 2030s United States Air Force. General Olvin, who is the Air Force Chief of Staff, recently had a social media post in which was explaining the lineup of the Air Force for the 2030s. It would be 3 tiers rather than 2. The low tiers would be F-15EX and F-16s. The mid tiers would be F-22s and F-35s. The high tiers would be F-47 and CCA. There is no mention of a potential F-55. So it is clearly not a feasible proposal. It would cost an enormity. It will take probably decades to see production. And the final question that we have is why Trump said so. Well, I don't think he is just stupid. I don't think he doesn't listen to his staff about the future development of the Air Force. What I'm thinking is that consistently with his love of hyperbolic announcements, he likes to throw curveballs to the opponents and see what happens. And I believe that this one was a curveball. So this is it. Please like and subscribe. And if you can, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon or by being a member or by any of the other means available. That would help immensely to keep the show running. This is the end. We will be back to more serious stuff in the next video. So until next time, peace.